Welcome to Matters Financial and Geopolitical from the Frontier, and thanks again for taking time out to come and stop by. I appreciate it. Just to remind you that I'll be hosting Charles Ireland, the CEO of East African Breweries, at Mindspeak on the 22nd of February. Mindspeak is, of course, held at the Intercontinental. There is a link on Rich Wrap-Ups for a synthesis of an interview I did last year with Charles. And I'll also put up a photograph that I like of Charles at a Johnny Walker function at the Norfolk. You'll also see Chris Karubi in that photograph as well. If you haven't seen my interview with NG Vasanji, please have a look at it. My macro thoughts, I wrote a piece over the weekend called "Who Are You Going to Believe, Me or Your Own Eyes?" is a remark that has been attributed to Groucho Marx, and I have always found useful in my more successful operations. I remember a time in London when George Davis's Next, a clothing chain, was the darling of the city. The share price had soared, Next could do no wrong, and Nishat and I were walking down the high street, and we popped into Next. I said to Nishat, "There is absolutely no one in here." She said, "Well, let's go then." I said that if she did not mind, I would like to spend an hour in the shop. And I counted 3 customers during that hour, none of whom made a purchase. And I said to Nisha, I have to call George. George was a rather plummy broker who always felt a little too concerned for my liking about what might turn out to be my fast and foreign ways. I said to George, "What price is Next trading at?" He says, £10, might have even been higher, a share, and every broker says it's going to 20, old chap. I said, "George, I want to borrow the shares for a year, and I'm prepared to pay 2% of the value." At this point, George thought I was mad. He asked how many I wanted to borrow. I said 10,000 shares. I wrote a cheque for £200. And I kept checking every day if the shares had been placed in my account. Then when he confirmed I had 10,000 shares in my account, I said, "George, you are not breaking popcorn, George." I could not resist that. That is, of course, what Muhammad Ali was whispering in George Foreman's ear as George Foreman pounded him on the ribs. "George, you're not breaking popcorn, George." I said, "George, please sell 10,000 Next shares and confirm the price." George knew the contract size was 10 times the size of anything I had done before, and responded, "But you don't own any shares, you've only borrowed them." I would have said, "Well, why on earth would I borrow them?" But I didn't. He was horrified, and if you do the maths, you will note that a £1 move in the share price was worth £10,000. I think I might have been the first short seller the venerable brokerage of Henderson Crosswaite had ever encountered. Subsequently, the share price collapsed to 0, but George, with a great deal of cajoling, had eased me out of the position a lot earlier. The lessons I'm drawing are the following, I think. Kick the tires, kick them all the time. It's a frame of mind. When you see an opportunity, you also have to execute. Opportunity without execution is meaningless. You, of course, cannot short sell shares in the Nairobi Securities Exchange. I put up the link for the mirror scene from the Duck Suit movie where this phrase comes, "Who are you going to believe, me or your own eyes?" That's on Rich Wrap-Ups. Home thoughts turn to the story about Australian astronomers are positive they've discovered the most ancient star to date. Spectral analysis of the composition of the newly discovered star shows it formed approximately 13.6 billion years ago, shortly after the creation of the universe. Modern cosmological science maintains that our universe came into being as a result of a Big Bang event some 13.7 billion years ago. Our Sun is approximately 4.57 billion years old. The new star beats the previous longevity record of 13.2 billion years set by a star dubbed HD 140283. This old star, catalogue number SMSS J031300.36, 1-670839.3, was found in our own Milky Way galaxy. It has a mass 60 times bigger than our Sun and is relatively close to us, some 6,000 light years from Earth. It's giving us insight into our fundamental place in the universe. What we're seeing is the origin of where all the material around us that we need to survive came from. Somebody else saying a star is like an onion. It has all these layers, and the heaviest material, like iron, is right down in the core. This means that every new generation of stars would contain more heavy chemical elements such as iron. This means that the less iron there is in the star's light spectrum, the older it is. This is the first time we've unambiguously been able to say we've got material from the first generation of stars, Keller said. We're now going to be able to put that piece of the jigsaw puzzle in its right place. And I do love the stars, I must admit. And on that note, I'll put up a photograph of Hannah and I in the early hours at Lake Elbentiter looking up the stars, and they felt so close. It was as if we were in a theatre club or something. Really is very magical. Rumi's comment, we come spinning out of nothingness, scattering stars like dust. And I couldn't resist putting up a link for David Bowie's Starman. And finally, 2 other photographs, the study at Lake Elbentiter Serena Hotels and Canada's Bilodeau, who won at the Sochi Olympics, and I quite liked this photograph. Political reflections let me start with Pankaj Mishra, who's writing about a fearful India sees a saviour in Narendra Modi. India's biggest businessmen want Narendra Modi, the Chief Minister of Gujarat, to be the country's next Prime Minister. A simple quid pro quo doesn't explain the effervescent cult of Modi among upper caste urban Hindus, including some of my own friends and relatives, or the fervour, even a section of the intelligentsia, for a leader whom Ashish Nandi, one of India's most respected public intellectuals, describes as a classic clinical case of a fascist, with clear paranoid and obsessive personality traits. Modi uses the most beguiling discourse in underdeveloped countries, that of development, promising bullet trains and 100 smart cities, offers the Indian middle class, which has long suffered from Singapore envy, its utopia of a neat, clean urban environment in which the poor are miraculously absent. Modi mania is also an epiphenomenon of India's recent political and economic crisis, particularly the abrupt collapse of the global Indian takeover project. Many of those invested in this absurd delusion have suffered both material and psychic losses. They, just as much as Indians left behind or pushed back by uneven growth, are vulnerable to demagogues promising a national regeneration. The great poet Heinrich Heine expressed early the overpowering German longing for salvation through a robust leader. Chase out these clowns and close the show. Be their critics and chastiser. Shut down this parody of the past. Come soon, O Kaiser. Something like this saviour delirium seems to have infected many urban Indians today. It is too early to say whether salvation by Modi will also portend a catastrophic breakdown of social order and moral restraint. But with elections just months away, it does seem the right time to be suspicious of his formidable cheerleaders and to redouble faith in the wisdom of Indian voters and in India's great political and social diversity. I wrote to Pankaj saying my analysis shows that here's a chance of taking the whole thing lock, stock and barrel. And I'll put up a photograph of Narendra Modi. I came across this article on Global Research talking about Thomas X. Hames' offshore control, a proposed strategy for an unlikely conflict. Hames, a former Marine colonel, authored several books on counterinsurgency warfare. He came to prominence in 2006 when, alongside two other ex-military officers, he criticized the conduct of the Iraq invasion and called for Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld's resignation. In 2011, Hams authored criticisms of the Obama administration's escalation of the war in Afghanistan, calling it failure in the making. Currently a senior research fellow at the National Defense University, he has published several articles since December promoting his offshore control plan. In summary, Hames proposed in 2012 that the US repudiate direct attacks on targets located on the Chinese mainland and focus instead on preparing for an economic blockade of China, which is included within air-sea battle, but only as a secondary aspect. Offshore control, he wrote, seeks termination of the conflict on US terms through China's economic exhaustion without damage to mainland China's infrastructure or the rapid escalation of the conflict. It recognizes the fact that the concept of decisive victory against a nation with major nuclear arsenal is fraught with risks, if not entirely obsolete. He advocated that the US military instead cripple China's export trade, which is essential to China's economy. This would involve sinking or intercepting and turning back vessels, in other words, that in peacetime would be piracy on a mass scale. He noted that 80% of China's imported oil transits the Straits of Malacca. If Malacca, Lombok, Sunda, and the routes north and south of Australia were controlled, these shipments could be cut off, causing a massive energy crisis. And I think that's my theory as well. And I wrote about this on the 2nd of December 2013 when I said, if you're considering distant blockade operations, one of those areas you will be blockading is this part of the world, given the amount of energy that is likely to be sold into Asia in the future. And I was talking about the air-sea battle concept, and do have a read. The article came under the title, "The Pivot Asia Bears Its Fangs." And of course, part of the reason around that point I'm making about the energy was why PM Abe Shinzo was to be found meeting the doorman of the Serena Polana in Maputo. Spain orders the arrest of former Chinese president and others over Tibet. Spanish High Court Judge Ismael Moreno on Monday sought international arrest warrants for former Chinese President Jiang Zemin, ex-Prime Minister Li Peng, and others on allegations of genocide in Tibet. And on that note, I'll put up a photograph of thousands protesting in Tibet, demanding a religious leader's release that I found on Twitter. Currency markets, the euro 136.70, dollar index 80.54, Japanese yen 102.18, Swiss franc 0.8948, the pound above 164, 164.26, Aussie, which has had a strong rebound, 0.90007. This has touched to touch the highest since January 14th at 0.9015. India rupee 62.415, South Korean won 1071.34, Rial 240.89, fell for the first time in 5 days and lost 1.3%. It's dropped 4% in the past 3 months. The Egyptian pound 696.12 and the rand at 1112.49. The Aussie has risen 1.6% this year against a basket of 9 developed nation currencies. That's the biggest after the yen's 4% advance. The New Zealand dollar 1.7% gain, and the US dollar has rallied 0.6%. Janet Yellen will deliver her first testimony to Congress since being sworn in as Federal Reserve Chairman. Dollar index, I'll put up a 3-month chart of that, wasn't able to break through that level I've been speaking about, 81.10 area. The FOMC, of course, said it will cut monthly purchases by $10 billion, and I expect that to continue. Euro dollar 136.70 last, I'll put up a 3-month chart. My stop is at 133.80. Dollar yen, I'll put up a 3-month chart of that as well, and the yen has had a strong start to the year. Vodafone could have the capacity to spend $30 billion to $40 billion on acquisitions in coming years, and no deal should be too big if it makes strategic sense. That's Vittorio Colau saying on that on Monday. If you have a chance, do have a look at the interview I did with him some time ago. But interestingly, I took a twit pic, or I asked someone to take a twit pic, and he said, we're done with stake sales. That was 879 days ago, and indeed he is done with stake sales and looking at purchases now. Gold is at the highest level since November the 18th, very strong opening to this year, 1283.75 last time I looked. Fifth day of gains would be the longest such run since August. Crude oil above 100. I'm buying puts now. I'll put up a 3-month chart of that. Kuwait's budget surplus adds up to almost $40,000 per citizen. Interesting article on Bloomberg if you go to have a look, and I'll put up a photograph of Kuwait as seen from the sky when I went to the Arab African Economic Forum, and also one of people enjoying their time at the beach in Kuwait. Coming to Africa, gunmen murdered a politician outside his house in the Central African Republic's capital overnight. No group claimed responsibility for killing Jean-Emmanuel Jarawa. Attackers followed Jarawa, a Christian representative, and shot him several times near his house in northern Bangui on Sunday night. He was returning home from town and he was shot down with 8 gunshots by armed men. I'll put up a photograph of Bangui and just mention it remains horribly volatile, doesn't it? East African countries will meet on Monday in Nairobi to discuss the way forward for a joint regional military response to conflicts in the region. This is the Eastern Africa Standby Force. Contributing countries are Burundi, Comoros, Djibouti, Ethiopia, Kenya, Rwanda, Seychelles, Somalia, Sudan, and Uganda. In his address at the 22nd African Union Summit in Addis Ababa earlier this month, Kenyan President Uhuru Kenyatta said the region urgently needs a rapid response force. Then, to counterweight that, I read this article. There was research saying U.S. military intervention in Africa, the East African Response Force, a creation of the Pentagon. And explaining why that is. My conclusions are the US has a decisive hard power advantage and increasingly is using this hard power insertion in Africa with which to tilt the pitch and essentially against China. McDonald's CEO Thompson seeks new African markets for expansion. He's looking at potential new markets in Africa after the world's largest restaurant chain entered a new Southeast Asian country for the first time in more than 2 decades. We're looking at the opportunities that Africa may yield. There's quite a few countries across Africa we want to look at, but Nigeria clearly is a large country that has opportunity. Bob Diamond is seeking financial services acquisitions across Africa. This is an interview he gave to Bloomberg. South African all-share still negative for the year, minus 0.65%. Dollar versus Rand, when I looked last, I'll put up a 3-month chart above 11.10, doesn't trade strong even as the rest of the higher beta currencies are rebounding. Egyptian pound, 696.12. The Egyptian stock market is at a fresh 46-month high and is plus 10.46% this year. I found this interesting. Tourism in Egypt, they only made £3.6 billion in 2013 compared with £7.7 billion in a record year of 2010. The Nigerian all-share is down 1.64%. Nigeria may ban the sale of new SIM cards to improve service quality. They had 156 million mobile phone subscriptions as of October 2013. The Ghana Stock Exchange snapped a 15-session winning streak, which had driven it to all-time highs. It remains the best-performing stock market in Africa, up 12.8%, but you've seen some of those returns eroded because of the weak cedi. The governor of the Bank of Mozambique said that Mozambique's economy is expected to grow at 8.1% this year and 8% in 2015, but could grow even more if improvements were made to its railway network. South Sudan, we have foreign reserves for up to 6 months. For the time being, the country has no problem in terms of foreign currency. At the onset of the crisis, one would have expected the parallel rate to go to 7, 8, 9, 10 per dollar, but surprisingly it's remained between 450 and 480, the minister said. I'll put up a photograph of South Sudan's rebel leader Riek Machar sitting near his men in rebel-controlled territory in Jonglei State on January the 31st, 2014. South Sudanese rebels have threatened on Monday to boycott the next round of peace talks in Ethiopia unless the government freed political prisoners and sent home the Ugandan troops who have been supporting it. Moving on to Kenya, China apparently helped arrest a suspected ivory smuggler in Kenya. First time that China has helped arrest a wildlife crime suspect overseas, according to the country's official news agency. Kenyan authorities arrested the man, surnamed Zue, in Nairobi on the 17th of January, Xinhua reported. He was extradited the next day. China's burgeoning middle class is considered a driving force behind the international trade in wildlife contraband, estimated to be worth £11.6 billion per year. China accounts for 70% of global demand for ivory. I'll put up that photograph I like of the elephants that I took in the Amboseli on the 1st of September 2013. Kenya shilling is at 86.15. The Nairobi all-share is plus 0.45% this year and 5.056% below a record high set on the 24th of January this year. NSE 20 is down 2.21%, and there's a link on Rich Wrap Up so you can inspect any share that you want to inspect. I'm afraid, bad news down in Kuwait, a police officer was shot, AK-47 was stolen by gunmen on a motorbike in Kuwait. That's not good news at all. If you want to follow the real-time price feed from the stock exchange, register on the site, rich.co.ke, get a password, it's all free, and then go to Rich Live. Once again, thank you kindly for stopping by.